hello everybody who's there on Zoom. Thank you for joining us. I'll keep an eye on people as they come. You can see here the lovely Anita Ralph, who is a medicinal herbalist, author and co-author, or contributing author to Anne Henderson's book Natural Menopause. Natural Menopause. I can't even speak anymore. That's the one. That is the one. And tonight we are talking about, if you can't take HRT, if you don't want to take HRT, or if you just need extra things in your toolkit, how herbal remedies might be able to fill the gap. So that's sort of what we're talking about now. So where are we? What time is it? 1 minute in. My watch is fast. So yes, here's another. To give people a minute. I'll give them another minute to sort of turn up or so we don't miss it. Why do I keep thinking that's a touch screen? So they don't miss out on anything, and then we shall get underway. It would help if my watch were a couple of minutes ahead. Hello, lovelies there on Instagram. So I will explain to you why you can only see me again if you've only just joined. We're actually doing this on Zoom, and Anita Ralph is with us. She's going to be talking about herbs and menopause. So, all right. Let us get underway. So I shall reintroduce you again for those who've just joined. This is Anita Ralph. I will show you over here just so you can see who is talking. There you go. We're going live simultaneously.
Good evening. It's lovely to be here. Thanks, Fiona.
And we are talking about herbs and menopause. So herbalism does have a pretty ancient history. Where did it start, or how did it start, and how does it fit now together with modern medicine?
Well, Fiona, yeah, it really is ancient. You could say one of the oldest professions, and it goes back to pretty much every culture on the planet has used herbal medicine at some point, and often for the main source of healthcare. In fact, even the World Health Organization today recognise that probably 60% of the world's population still rely on herbal medicine as their main source of healthcare. And so, in actual fact, what we think of as modern medicine, our technological, conventional medicine, is actually a relative newcomer, sort of arriving 150 to 250 years ago, initially with things like mercury and a lot of the sort of chemistry sort of medicines that began as chemistry. The birth of the science of chemistry occurred, and actually herbal medicine has sort of inspired quite a lot of our modern drugs. So again, a large number of modern drugs originated by single chemicals that were found in plants being extracted and put into a sort of more of a synthetic, made in the laboratory, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Aspirin's a really good example of that. For example, aspirin's name originally came from the plant spirea, a plant called meadowsweet as well in modern times. And it was found to be very effective as being an anti-inflammatory and painkiller. But once it was synthesized in the laboratory, it forms a slightly different chemical structure. So it has other effects that are different to the plant. And actually, I think this is going to be worth saying now, because I think it will inform our discussion about herbs going forward this evening.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, since ancient times and moving forward to today, it has become a boom industry, especially when it comes to menopause. I was looking up today doing a bit of research, and they're saying that by 2028 it will be worth £22.7 billion. That's menopause supplements alone. That's an awful lot of money. So it is big business, and there are a lot of claims being made, and the traditional medical side of things will look at those claims and they're going to go, there's nothing, you've got nothing backing this up. How do you reconcile those two together in what you're doing?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is that I'm a practitioner of herbal medicine, and modern medical herbalists like myself actually train in conventional medicine. So we train in all the conventional medical sciences, but we also look at a slightly different angle of therapeutics. So we look at the way that plants interact with our bodies, and how plants might or might not interact, therefore, with synthetic chemical drugs. So we are, in fact, the experts in prescribing in a modern context But what we do is prescribe herbal medicines for our patients. We tend not to use over-the-counter supplements, but you're right, there are a lot of them out there. In the UK, there is a system of licensing so that any supplement sold in the UK has to have enough research to back it up to be able to be called a menopause supplement. So in the very fact that they are out there at all is because there is actually so much research backing up the effects of these plants. And so it's often, the claim is often made that there isn't much research supporting herbal medicine, but actually the contrary is the case. We only know as much as we do about estrogens, about the receptor sites in our body that accept estrogens, precisely because of research into plant medicine.
True, but I guess when it comes to a lot of those claims, that when they've come and they've looked at the studies and they've gone, well, a lot of these studies are pretty rubbish. They're very small, or they're badly constructed, or they're not very well done. And so they'll say there's either limited evidence or insufficient evidence, or more research is needed, which sort of, it makes it difficult for people to know what to believe, really, doesn't it?
You're absolutely right, and it's, I really like being asked these questions because it strikes, at the heart of what should women be doing. And I think one of the reasons that there are so many supplements out there is that 50% of the population is going to go through menopause at some point. And so that is a huge number of people that essentially have one option being state funded. Basically synthetic estrogen in the form of HRT, which is enormously helpful for many women, but is not the only way that we can manage our menopause. And you could, I think any good scientist would be able to pick holes in most research, really. Any kind of critical analysis of research would pretty much, we call certain research papers gold standard, but many of them only run for 6 weeks, and you can get all sorts of results and you can manipulate statistics to look at it. So I'm afraid I would levy the same criticism. I see people in my clinic all the time that have supposedly been given a drug that has got lots of research supposedly, but these people are not responding to it. They seem to be all right initially, but then they start to have problems with the drug. So in actual practice, in medical practice, many of the doctors I know as well would say that even conventional medicine falls down once you actually have people involved.
Yes, damn us, we get in the way of everything. Now, the other thing about herbal medicine and things like that is everybody has this sort of belief that, if it's herbal and it's natural, it must be safe. Is that always the case? Are there times when we actually do have to think about the interactions and the safety of a product?
Yeah, again, really good question, Fiona, because you're absolutely right. There are poisonous plants out there. We know this, but the sorts of plants that medical herbalists use are incredibly safe, and many of them are actually forgotten foods. They're actually plants that our ancestors probably would have incorporated into their diet, or not probably, definitely. We forget that it wasn't so long ago that people would have brushed their teeth with the twigs from trees and not with plastic and nylon bristles. And not so long ago, we would have cooked our food in bark holders and eaten off plates of leaves. We would have ingested so many more phytochemicals, plant compounds, and we knew how to do that. We survived right the way through to modern times using plant medicines. So I think I've gone off piste a bit there. I was imagining a big plate of food, like a nice curry on a banana leaf.
Yes, actually, that thought went through my mind when you mentioned leaf as well. But they do have interactions with other drugs sometimes, don't they? And as with everything, the dosage is important. So shall we move though to, because we can go through those sorts of things then, in the book you've got them sort of herb by herb or plant by plant, whereas as I've decided to throw that on the head and do it by symptom just to be truly annoying. So let's start with the vasomotor symptoms, because they're the ones that a lot of people find that they are concerned about, and the herbs that seem to work for that are black cohosh, red clover, skullcap, chaste tree, or Agnus castus as some people call it, valerian, evening primrose oil, lemon balm, and sage. So a lot of things you can actually find in your kitchen there. Shall we take those one by one, and you can tell us how they work, what they do, and what to look out for with
I'll
those?
do my best. Yeah.
All right, black cohosh.
Yeah. Well, what an amazing plant this is. And we have to thank the Native American peoples, the First Nations peoples of the USA, for talking to us at all about this plant. In fact, it was originally really used by them for arthralgia, pain in the joints, and it was also, I understand, used by Native American women to help them at different phases in their life. The start of their periods, when they were literally giving birth, this plant was used, and again at menopause. And so our knowledge of it at all comes from incredibly traditional use. And in fact, the Wellcome Library, the National Library of the History of Medicine in London, has lots of books written by doctors returning from the Americas, talking about how women seemed to be so much more well through their pregnancies. They delivered babies on their own in the woods. They seemed not to suffer as they aged, and that they used a huge array of herbal medicines. And modern people who have a Native American lineage will talk about herbs like black cohosh as being a wisdom herb, and something that, you know, that herbal medicine was so ingrained as part of the culture. So it seems really strange to us today to think about herbs. There's this strange name, black cohosh, you know, is it really mysterious? Is it dangerous? And so much research was done on this plant. It's been really well researched, that it's been shown to not only support the production of postmenopausal estrogen. There's a different type of estrogen that we produce postmenopausally. It's not proliferative, meaning it doesn't thicken the lining of the womb, nor does it thicken the breast tissue. Really significant, that, because that means that it doesn't have the same risks as proliferative estrogens that could perhaps be implicated in breast cancer. But even furthermore than that, black cohosh has been shown to block receptor sites to the types of estrogen that can cause breast cancer. And it's been shown in studies to improve the efficacy of tamoxifen, the drug that is given to women if they've had breast cancer that's estrogen receptive. And the reason that came about is because black cohosh seemed to alleviate hot flushes in all of the studies done. And we still truly don't know the exact mechanism, but it seems to have beneficial effects in the liver, beneficial effects in the adrenal glands, and beneficial effects to the gut microbiome. And we happen to know that our postmenopausal estrogens are produced on the dependency of these three parts of our body working together. So it's a bit complicated, and that's always the problem of the herbalist, is how to communicate this complexity of our bodies. It really isn't just a case of black cohosh being a herbal HRT. It seems to encourage and promote the optimal function of tissues that would naturally be working well in menopause.
All right, now that makes perfect sense. I've got that.
That's
Yeah.
great, thank you.
Exactly. It sort of works with the neurotransmitters and the pituitary glands and things like that, does it? So, which regulate messages that are being sent sort of around the body when it comes to hormones.
Yeah, so we're not sure, but almost certainly black cohosh has a part to play there, yes. But some of the other herbs that you mentioned have a much stronger affinity for the pituitary gland, and how it has a major role actually in the production of our hormones throughout our fertile years and then postmenopausally as well. Yeah. So herbs, you mentioned Vitex agnus castus, sometimes abbreviated to agnus castus, the sort of beautiful aromatic Mediterranean shrub, chaste tree. It's got lots of names actually. It was called monk's pepper, just because it was just put literally like pepper on food. It was like, as I say, many of these plants are forgotten foods.
Yeah.
The little peppercorn-like fruits do taste quite peppery, but what seems to be remarkable again about this plant, incredibly well researched, lots and lots of trials on Vitex agnus castus, and it seems to really improve the interconnection between the pituitary gland in our brain and the ovary, and actually it seems to help also thyroid function and adrenal gland function. And so sometimes our symptoms in menopause are due to other problems outside of the normal glands. It's not just a menopause problem. So sometimes thyroid problems can be causing some of those.
There's a lot of similarity, isn't there, between a lot of crossover between those, a lot of the symptoms, isn't there? Doesn't me take you back to the black cohosh for a minute. Side effects, anything that people should be aware of if they're going to take supplements with black cohosh? Because there was a period of time back there when it was associated with some severe liver problems, wasn't it? But that wasn't necessarily the black cohosh, it was something else that was in it, I believe.
It definitely wasn't black cohosh. In fact, what had happened is that unscrupulous suppliers had been digging up roots that were not black cohosh and putting them into capsules and with the word black cohosh. And I think this is the biggest risk that people have buying herbs without going to see a practitioner of herbal medicine. When you're buying over-the-counter products, we still don't have an international agreement about what makes a herb really a herb. Is it really what it says on the tin? And that is still a real annoyance for medical herbalists like us. Yes, there was a small episode, but nevertheless awful, of a few people who took a supplement that was not black cohosh but claimed to be. But here, as I say, in the UK, that you now have to have a license to supply a product, so it does get tested actually in the laboratory. And that is overseen by the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency in the UK. So if your product is sold in the UK, it has to meet that standard.
Which I guess means that if you're looking at things online, then make sure that you know where they're coming from.
Absolutely, definitely. And so sometimes it might appear cheaper and you're buying it in from somewhere else, but there may be a good reason for that.
Yeah.
But black cohosh is pretty much well tolerated. You don't need very large doses. Quite a lot of the products out there have very high doses, and that's not really necessary. Studies show that people respond really well to very low doses.
What sort of dose do you mean when you say low dose? What should they be looking for?
Well, that's really, really difficult to say because of the way that the over-the-counter products have been extracted. Medical herbalists will tend to use what's called a crude extract. It literally is the roots pounded up and mixed into a water alcohol mixture, and that you really would need something like 10 grams a week. It's a tiny, tiny amount. So you'd be looking at something like equivalent of the dried capsule. It really is something like literally 100 milligrams a week. It's a tiny amount. But there is a very small incidence where some people get a migraine-like headache taking black cohosh, and if you get that, it is self-limiting. So in other words, it goes away if you just stop taking it. And it really only occurs in a tiny number of people. I've only ever seen it 3 times in my whole practice life, and I see a lot of people. So it is rare, but it's just one of those little things to watch out for.
Yeah, I had one woman who sent a question in about something else, saying that she tried the black cohosh and got dizzy. So
Right.
she stopped that afterwards, then it was fine. Any conditions, if you've got pre-existing conditions, is there anybody who should avoid it? Liver conditions, anything along those lines?
Well, I think if anybody does have a pre-existing condition, and in particular something that might involve their liver, I think you should see a practitioner anyway. I think it's a bit like DIY and home plumbing. There are lots of little things you can do yourself. You can go around, bleed the radiators, just make sure that your taps are secure, and you can tighten a few nuts and bolts. But actually, if you've got a major problem with your plumbing, you should get a plumber in. And I really, really think it's the same for herbal medicine. It's our body, it's our health. If you have a pre-existing condition, perhaps self-medication is not really a good idea.
Yeah, very true. All right, let's move on to red clover. This is the other one. So these are the phytoestrogens. isoflavones, phytoestrogens, all those sorts of things. Now, they're claimed that they can help with osteoporosis, with
Mm.
mood, hair loss even, and the hot flushes. Interesting ones. Are they? How do they work? And what do they? How efficacious are they?
You're going to wish you never asked me how do they work. So yeah, because yeah, I think one of the things that, so first of all, they started to look at these things in the early 90s when epidemiological studies on large groups of populations of people showed that people that ate soy as a staple food, morning, noon and night, these people seemed to have better outcomes in terms of breast cancer and menopausal symptoms. And so there was a suggestion that certain plants like red clover and soya, that are all in the same plant botanical family, by the way, the legume family, that perhaps they contained a kind of estrogen, and so it was coined phytoestrogen, but more correctly they're phytosterols. They're special compounds that we can recognize because of their structure, and they are interesting because they interact with our body in a really specialized way. In fact, it's thought that we have, because we've coexist with these plants for hundreds of thousands of years as humans on this planet, we've probably changed our DNA so that we can actually absorb these plants. So there's quite a lot of interest in how come we've actually changed what goes on in our bodies to really cope with these plants and to be able to eat huge quantities of them. So phytosterols, how do they work? They actually have an estrogen modulating effect. That means that they, in the presence of large amounts of estrogen, so before menopause, they can actually mop up excess estrogen. And so they're traditionally, plants like red clover were used in olden times for symptoms and conditions where there was excess estrogen, which is, so that's exactly the opposite of what you might think. But when there is a relative deficiency of estrogen, these plants seem to innovate and interact with receptor sites on the cells of our body that use estrogen. So brain cells, cardiovascular system cells, muscle cells, bone cells, and they seem to weakly stimulate the benefits of estrogen, but once again, they're non-proliferative. So they tend to block the effects of what are known as xenoestrogens, or cancer-inducing estrogens, that come from synthetic products in our environment.
Because there is a debate, isn't there, that some women shouldn't have, if they've got a history or a risk of breast cancer, that they should sort of steer a bit clear of any phytoestrogen supplements.
Well, so there's a lot of research now that's showing that actually it's almost certainly that these plants actually infer overall a protective effect against those cancers. There's quite a bit of research showing the benefits, but there's also quite a lot of gaining research showing that there are actually probably protective effects. The exception might be, and at the moment it's a theoretical might be, that again, people with liver problems, people who are perhaps already very ill, maybe they should be careful about what herbs they are taking. And I think you could say that about any conventional medical drug as well. If often the people I see, if they're really unwell, don't always respond to conventional medicine as you would expect either. Yeah. But basically, these plants are very beneficial, and they tend to actually protect us very slightly against some of the problems we might associate with excess estrogen. But what are you buying? When you buy, you said the word isoflavone there, and quite often companies that sell so-called herbs will have a picture on the front of the packet that looks like a plant, but the word isoflavone is there. And if it's there, it isn't a plant, it's a synthetic isoflavone, or just the one chemical, the isoflavone, has been extracted and it's been put into a capsule. And I think once you've done that, it's no longer a herbal medicine, it's a drug. And therefore it's going to start to behave differently to if you are actually eating red clover flowers or taking those in the form of a tea or something.
Yeah. Speaking of eating red clover flowers, as I was doing the research today, I came across a bizarre bit of information. But I guess this comes down to the dose of things, I suppose, isn't it? And this is about sheep, and I know we're not sheep, but back in Australia in the 1940s, there were farmers noticed that their sheep were becoming infertile, were having more miscarriages, that the lambs that were being born had a lot of abnormalities, and they worked out it was because they were on fields of red clover and they were just eating way, way, way too much of it. So does that mean, for us as humans, should we take notice that slightly and just make sure that we're not having, you can think if something's good, knowing humans, I know a number of people say, oh, 2 vitamin C tablets isn't going to hurt me, 5 vitamin things, they're only vitamins. So should we actually be careful with what we're taking then when it comes to phytoestrogens, because they may possibly have an endocrine disrupting element to them?
Yeah, I remember that piece of research, and I wish I could remember what has latterly come to light about it. But there was something else going on with those sheep, and I can't quite remember what it was, but it may have been the pesticide or whatever that had been used on that red clover. And it's significant because pesticides contain something called bisphenols, and bisphenols act as xenoestrogens. They are cancer inducing and hormone disruptors. That's what they actually are. So there was something about those sheep, but I can't actually remember what it was. But equally, yeah, if you eat too many dried figs in an evening, there's going to be an outcome, literally. So, I think there's always a case for sort of saying, yeah, just because it's natural, just because it's plant-based, you just got to watch out. Too many plates of cabbage all in one evening, it's going to have an effect.
Very true. Skull cap. That's the next one that's apparently good for vasomotor things. What is skull cap and how does it work?
Oh, thank you for asking about this beautiful little plant. It's in the mint family. It's got the name skullcap because when it's finished flowering, and it's got the most incredible flower, it's a tube of purple on the top and white underneath. It's very, very beautiful. It's in the mint family, but then when it's finished flowering, it produces a little bract with its seed pod underneath, and it looks like a little skullcap, hence the name. And this plant, because it is in the mint family, has chemicals that our body really metabolizes just like food. It's incredibly safe. It can be given to children and the elderly. It's a really pleasant tasting tea, but it's well known to ease the nervous system, calm and relax, calm excessive thoughts, and just make us feel a lot more chilled out. It's a really lovely thing to have. And so sometimes our hot flushes are coming about as a result of just overwork, overstimulation, not enough calm, not enough rest. But I think not just the plant itself, but perhaps the ritual of stopping and drinking some tea and taking time is all part of that soothing of our overactive nervous system and the draining of our energy that so often happens for women who are multitasking and juggling all sorts of things at perimenopause and menopause.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. Exactly. Anything with skull cap that we should be aware of in terms of interaction with medicines or any other things? No, that's an easy one, no problems.
Really easy. As long as it really is what it purports to be, as long as it really is skullcap. And there's an American skullcap called Scutellaria lateriflora, and there's a European skullcap called Scutellaria altissima. But as long as the species is correct, it's absolutely wonderful, and it's very easy to take. You can take lots of it, and you can take it every day for your whole life if you really wanted to.
Sounds nice, and I could actually do with a nice soothing cup. All right, so then vasomotor, moving on. You mentioned the Agnus castus. Is there anything else to say about the Agnus castus, the chaste tree, or are you happy that you've
Gosh, I'm a big fan of chaste tree berries and the plant itself, and I do wonder whether women, the knowledge that women must have passed down to each other as part of our European tradition. I feel like women's voices have often not been heard in history. You know, and I wonder a little bit, you know, whether quite a lot of our European herbal medicines have fallen by the wayside because they had to be sort of hidden and couched in different language. We find herbs that are traditionally used for women's health, like peony, for example, you know, whispered about in herbals, saying, well, you know, should be taken by the moonlight and things like that, and it all makes it sound very witchy and very as if it's very silly. But I actually think some of this was code, because women were not really supposed to be talking about this stuff. And
I wonder. You might be right, actually. All right. Moving on from Agnes Castus, then the other thing. Where are we? Chasing valerian. Now that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it seems to have a lot of uses as well. But when it comes to hot flushes, what's it doing? How and why?
Oh, well, again, it's so good to kind of think about this, because I think the knee-jerk reaction might be to say that valerian's very relaxing. You'll often find it sold as a sleep aid. It's non-addictive, despite its name, which sounds a little bit like Valium. It's nothing to do with Valium or benzodiazepines. It's a really well-tolerated, non-addictive, relaxing herbal medicine that can be taken at bedtime. But it also, because all plants contain multiple constituents, so instead of being one single chemical, plants are often a mixture of, and I think valerian has actually been shown in one study to contain over 150 different compounds. Each of the compounds in valerian also infer benefits. So it's been shown to improve the microbiome in the colon, that means the friendly bacteria in the large intestine, and also to relieve spasm in the small intestine. And this is really significant because our postmenopausal estrogens have to go into the small and intestine and be metabolized by our friendly bacteria. And if we are deficient in our friendly bacteria, we can't actually metabolize estrone, our postmenopausal estrogen, effectively. And it can lead to symptoms in and of itself. So a course of antibiotics could actually disrupt a menopausal woman's experience of menopause, make them have more hot flushes. So valerian's working on a number of different levels here. It's actually soothing, but it's also having a brilliant effect on the digestive system and the microbiome.
Yeah, which is, I think we're actually, the microbiome is one of the, between the histamine intolerance and the microbiome, I think we're sort of almost sitting on a completely different way of looking at the human body. Actually, I think we're in for an interesting few decades of
You're absolutely right.
things, which is a bit of aside, but a bit of fun. Yeah. All right. So with the valerian, though, it does have a number of side effects and can't be used with. There are certain things you have to be careful with, aren't there? Like you can't have it with. If you're on benzodiazepines, it probably wouldn't be a good idea to add in something else as an extra sedative type thing. So are there things that people should think about if they're having valerian?
I think that there's a lot of suggestion that you can't use these herbs alongside these conventional medical drugs. And I think that actually, if with a trusted relationship with a qualified practitioner, you can use those things. But once again, if you do find that you're on a number of medications, it really probably would be best to speak with a medical herbalist before self-administering plant medicines, partly because what is sold is sometimes in strange doses. So as I mentioned, I don't use over-the-counter products really in my practice, and I might use 5 or 6 different herbs in one prescription for one person. So I might see that a person has problems metabolizing things and that they've suffered with liver problems. So I might actually include some herbs to really support their liver function. I might be aware that they've had several courses of antibiotics and they've got microbiome disturbance. I'll include herbs for that. And then I might use valerian as well. But yeah, I think that sometimes it needs a more nuanced approach because we are complex as human beings.
Yeah, yeah. They also say just don't take it with alcohol, being a CNS depressant, which is probably not a good idea, and also to stop a couple of weeks before surgery. If you,
Yeah, again, there's no real medical evidence for any of those claims at all. Valerian is metabolized very successfully in the colon. It does not go through the liver in a pathway similar to drugs. It doesn't use the cytochrome pathway. So although your medical herbalist might be telling you to cut down on your alcohol at the same time, strictly speaking, there isn't really a major problem. And there's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction from pharmacists who are burdened with having to come up with all the information about plant medicines before somebody goes into surgery, and may not actually know whether it's safe to have close to surgery or not. So they tend to, perhaps quite rightly, play it safe, but there's no need to stop it 2 weeks before surgery. It isn't going to interfere with anaesthetic, and it isn't going to thin the blood or affect clotting factors. I usually, however, advise people to stop their herbal medicine 24 to 48 hours before, and certainly as soon as they go nil by mouth. And then but again, you working with a trusted practitioner, you'll be able to have access to the correct advice for you.
that is a good point. Lemon balm and sage, they're the other two that they say are quite good for vasomotor things. So let's start with sage, shall we? Because that's one that most people probably have in their kitchen. How does sage help?
It's an interesting name, isn't it? Sage. It means wise, right there. Or sensible. And yeah, sage, I think, was originally considered because it tends to stop excessive sweating, and so it was always used for that traditionally. It might have been applied externally to the body to prevent perspiration excess, but internally it can also help control fever. And sage was often used during infections because that very antiseptic taste that you get with sage is powerfully antibacterial and antiviral. So sage can be really, really good if you suffer from recurrent infections as well. And as women go through menopause, they often fall over and get recurrent infections, particularly ear, eye, nose, throat, or urinary tract infections. So sage can offer, again, a sort of an array of benefits. Sage, however, does also, since it's been investigated now, have these phytosterol modulating effects on estrogen, and so it seems to provide small benefits again in helping us produce our postmenopausal non-proliferative estrogens. A small, be careful with sage. Again, taking really large doses is really not advised. And if in doubt, have a week off once a month so that you have a little break from it, because in very large quantities, sage contains a really interesting compound called thujone. Thujone, it's spelt with a J in the middle. And thujone is mood lifting and brightening, and it can give us a real sense of joy, but too much of it can cause problems with the nervous system. You can get thujone poisoning, if you like, in the nervous system. So once again, a cup of tea made from a couple of leaves on a daily basis is not going to cause a problem. But if you're drinking 10 cups of tea a day, you're starting to get into sort of problematic areas.
Fair enough. And does it matter what type of sage it is? Because I think the Spanish sage is very different from, I don't know whether that means it's Spanish sage because it's sage from Spain, but is there a different type of sage that might not necessarily be the one that you would want to choose?
So there are, the species of sage that is used is Salvia officinalis. The word salvia is the scientific name, but it comes from the Latin meaning to save, where another sort of interesting name given the wise plant that saves you is quite interesting. But there are lots of sort of varieties of the same species of plants. So you can get purple sage, which is Salvia officinalis purpurea, or green sage, and so on. But I think the rule of thumb is to make sure, if you are harvesting sage from your garden, is first of all to make sure it is Salvia officinalis of some kind. It won't matter if it's red or green, but you should not really use variegated herbs as medicine. So you can use garden plants, but when the leaves have become splotched with white, they're often, that's a deliberate thing done by horticulturalists to make plants look really interesting. But what they're actually doing is inserting a virus into the leaves that causes the leaves to go those different colours. So it's a long-standing opinion of herbalists is probably best therefore to avoid those and not use those in herbal medicine.
Be the purist, exactly. All right, anxiety and mood. Now, the ones for anxiety and mood, there's a lot of overlap. We've got the black cohosh and the red clover that we've already done, and the skullcap and the valerian and the chaste tree and the sage. But there are a few different ones, aren't there? Let's have a look at St. John's wort. Now, that's an interesting one that also has a bit of controversy around it, with some people saying don't touch and others saying it's okay. So what do we think of St. John's wort?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons there is quite a lot of overlap is precisely because a lot of plants do contain similar compounds. So a lot of plants do contain anti-inflammatory phenolic compounds and immunomodulating glycosidic compounds. So a lot of plants do actually share quite a lot of compounds, and that's because they're producing them for themselves. The plants themselves need them to ward off infection and to help them be functioning well in their environment. But yeah, so I love to talk about St. John's wort because it is one of those much maligned herbs, and fantastically there was a really good piece of research in 2020 that has totally debunked the myth that it interacts with other medications. So I really would like to speak to that, if I may, as well. But it's kind of interesting that St. John's wort was...
Before you do that, I'd read out what they say that you shouldn't have it with. They say they shouldn't have it with antidepressants, with contraceptives, with anticoagulants, with immunosuppressants, with antipsychotics, or with sleeping pills.
I'm going to be really radical. Yeah, I'm going to say none of it's true. And whoa, stop press here. So that needs qualifying, doesn't it? So one of the is, again, through research, research often investigates tiny little parts, and bit by bit we build up our knowledge. So conventional medical sciences are based on lots and lots of tiny pieces of information put together. So again, St. John's wort in the 1990s was investigated for its antidepressant properties because it just seemed to be so effective. And initially a compound called hypericin was discovered, one chemical in the 150 to 200 different chemicals in St. John's wort. Eventually hyperforin was discovered, and about 6 different chemicals that were discovered, all thought to be responsible for its antidepressant effect. But and so much so that it is the most prescribed antidepressant in Germany by doctors. The top antidepressant is a synthetic hyperforin added to extract of St. John's wort, and this is the key. So hyperforin was the sort of the compound that seemed to be the easiest to make in the laboratory and to sell, and it seemed to be very well tolerated by people, but it was noted that it did use this cytochrome pathway through the liver, a different pathway like drugs do, to get broken down. And that was quite pleasing because conventional medicine really believes that things have to be single chemical and very direct in their action. And so everything sort of seemed to be quite good, except that because of this cytochrome activity, it was postulated that it might interact with drugs. But a really important research paper published in 2020 has shown that anything that doesn't have synthetic hyperforin or elevated levels of hyperforin in it does not, in fact, interact with this cytochrome pathway. It starts to be broken down like vegetable matter in the gut. And so if you were to make a tea from the flowers, if you were to take a tincture made by a herbalist, which is an alcohol and water extract of the whole plant, the leaves and the flowers, the levels of hyperforin are so negligible that they do not start to interact with our liver, this pathway, like conventional medication. And that fits with practice, I was a full-time practitioner from 1991 onwards, and seeing, you know, scores of patients every week, and I'd never noticed an interaction with the contraceptive pill with patients that were on anticoagulant medication or other so I was puzzled. I was always puzzled by this piece of advice that we shouldn't use it, that came out in the late 1990s, but it's taken this long for the scientists to prove that in fact it isn't quite what it was claimed to be.
Well, that's good. So how effective is it when it comes to mood? Is it good for all types of depression and anxiety type things, or is it limited to a certain amount?
Yeah, I think we have to remember it's a plant, and so you know, it's limited in what its compounds might be of benefit to us. Certainly, one thing we do know about it is that the plant seems to revive something called a glial cell, and a glial cell sits at the base of every single nerve cell in the body, and it restores its myelin sheath. Every nerve cell has a fatty myelin sheath to protect it, and as we go through life, if we get very stressed or over prolonged periods, these myelin sheaths can actually erode and wear away, and the glial cells become less functional. And St. John's wort has been shown in terms of mechanism. How does it work? That it seems to really revive the function and repair of the nervous system through its own glial cell system. And I think that's pretty much indicates sort of how herbalists see it, that it's a tonic for the nervous system. I always thought that phrase, frayed nerves, was quite interesting, because in a way it's describing this exact process.
Yeah, exactly. German chamomile, that's another one that's apparently good for mood and anxiety, and also does have evidence for gum disease, so I learned today, which is kind of interesting. So if you've got bleeding gums, apparently German chamomile can help. So what do we know about German chamomile and how does it work?
Just so one of the most underrated plant medicines on the planet, and so it's really lovely that you mentioned today that you found that there was this research paper on periodontitis, you know, basically gum disease, and leading to dental decay. But yeah, chamomile, like St. John's wort, contains a lot of really interesting anti-inflammatory chemicals, a whole array of them. And so via a whole different array of mechanisms, it can reduce inflammation in our body, particularly to the gut, but actually also to the skin and all the mucous membranes and surfaces of our body. So it's particularly good. You could put chamomile on your eyes if you had conjunctivitis, and you could put chamomile on your nipples if you had mastitis, and you could put chamomile on a wound if you'd cut yourself. Yeah, it's just the most beautiful plant. I love the fact that its scientific name is Matricaria. It means sacred mother, and its full scientific name means sacred mother of the gut. And I just think it's sort of speaks volumes really of what our science used to say about herbal medicine. It really was just a political decision to get rid of herbal medicine after the Second World War here in the UK. But before that, herbal medicine formed more than 50% of every medicine that was prescribed by your doctor. And so beautiful herbs like chamomile were like babies being thrown out with the bathwater. You know, it really was a shame, because it's so soothing, it's brilliantly microbiome restoring, it's anti-inflammatory, and you cannot take too much of it. You could drink it cupfuls every day of your life, and it's really good for you.
True. It's one thing, actually, just sadly on an aside, I absolutely hate the taste, which is like rules it out for me. It's like that one's gone. All right.
Do you know what though? That taste is so important. You know, Fiona, you've said something really important there. So you're right, chamomile, most people don't like it. I remember my first day at herbal medicine college, and I thought, I nearly cried. I thought, I'm never going to be a herbalist. This is disgusting. But chamomile's taste is bitter, and bitterness is really important, and it's central theme in herbal medicine. We have bitter receptors on our tongue that enable us to taste bitter. But what wasn't really known until about 5 years ago is we have bitter taste receptors throughout our immune system in all the way through our body. And so bitters actually help our immune system modulate itself. They have an anti-inflammatory effect on the immune system and prevent the immune system going awry. And so again, chamomile is used for hay fever and allergic conditions, just as much as it is for sleep or IBS or all the other things I've mentioned.
True. Which leads me then to sleep, where insomnia. So insomnia. The things that we have that are good for that are St. John's wort, which we've covered, the skullcap, which we've covered, the valerian, which we've covered, oat straw, and lemon balm. And I'm just noticing here we've got about 10 minutes left. So
Oh, amazing!
yeah.
You can't stop me. Sorry.
Yeah. So lemon balm and oat straw. What do we know about those, and how do they help with sleep?
So yeah, oat straw, is basically the flowering oat before it's formed the seed, the oat meal that can be rolled into rolled oats that we know of as porridge. But the plant before that is an interesting plant. It's a grass-like structure that can withstand all sorts of weather. So I really feel like it infers a real strength to our nervous system. Traditionally it was given to horses, wasn't it? Raise horses to kind of make them faster and capable of running longer distances. We know that it contains B vitamins, a full range of B vitamins, which are transported around our body by our nervous system and are stored in our adrenal glands. Our adrenal glands are absolutely vital at menopause for helping produce our postmenopausal estrogens. So you start to see a sort of step-by-step link between something as simple as the flowering oat and how it might support our nervous system at times of duress and stress, but yet also support the structures that help us promote our sleep pattern, because if we're in deep phase sleep, we stop producing a lot of the cortisols and the steroid-like compounds that keep us awake and alert and activated, which is why if we wake up in the middle of the night and it's dark, life can seem a bit terrible, or you start thinking about something, a problem, and it seems enormous, and then you wake up in the morning and think, why was I worrying about that? But this is because of our lowered cortisol levels at night. It's really important that our body lowers our cortisol levels so we can sleep, and it helps that whole melatonin cycle as well. And oat can really tap into that. It really helps us kind of really get into a deep rejuvenative sleep and get us going.
And lemon balm, and I'm guessing then these are things that you would take a couple of hours before you want to go to bed as well.
You certainly could, yeah. And they taste better than chamomile, Fiona, so we're on the up. And lemon balm is too. Yeah. So lemon balm's scientific name is Melissa, meaning loved by bees. It's again in the mint family. It's got a beautiful lemony scent. Once you've got it in your garden, you can't get rid of it. It grows everywhere. But it's very aromatic, and it's kind of interesting how aromas interact with the olfactory center, the smell center in our brain. And this olfactory center is really important in that pituitary axis again. So soothing our senses through the property of smell is really helpful to us at menopause. It has quite a more profound effect than it might seem.
Which actually leads me then to one that we haven't mentioned yet, which is useful for a number of things, and that's lavender for the olfactory thing. Now, this is an interesting one too, because it is associated with endocrine disruption, with gynecomastia and prepubescent development. But this is when when you've got it in your washing detergent, when you've got it on your baby's wipes, when you've got it in absolutely everything. It has caused issues with small children. But generally, for soothing and for calming you down, it's a very good one, isn't it?
I think, again, the problem arises with the synthetic versions of that. So synthetic do you know what, this is a brilliant opportunity to say to women, just watch out for these synthetic fragrances in your candles, in your beauty products, in your washing liquid. These are precisely the endocrine disruptors that I was talking about earlier. And so something that purports to be a lavender smell may not actually be a true lavender. So real, actual lavender flowers do not disrupt the endocrine system of children or of adults, and they are extraordinarily safe, like chamomile. But of course, herbalists would use the whole plant, so they tend not to extract the essential oil, they tend to use the whole plant, and that the essential oils in plants tend to form a maximum of 10% of all of the chemicals in the plant. So you've got 90% of all these other chemicals that are really beneficial to us. And lavender, like chamomile, contains bitters, which have a really important immunomodulating effect. They benefit our immune system. Lavender also, like lemon balm, has really powerful gut antispasmodic properties. It can be really soothing to the digestive system. And we all know about this gut-brain axis. You know, if nowadays, you know, if we've got a happier gut, our mental health is often a lot better too. So using aromatic herbs like this, perhaps just as part of everyday life, we can benefit in terms of our mood via our gut.
True. All right, last one, because we are almost out of time, and that is brain fog. Rosemary.
Yeah, so rosemary and sage have both been investigated actually for memory and clarity. And there are quite a few studies now showing that cognitive function is improved using these plants. And rosemary, we know, improves the circulation very slightly to the brain. It has this beneficial effect in terms of perfusion of oxygen. But it is actually a very pleasant plant, like lavender, like lemon balm, like skullcap. It's in the mint family, and it's formed part of our diet for thousands of years. And including rosemary in your food is just such a lovely thing to do, because it improves the digestive juices, that are the enzymes that help us digest protein and fat. So that again affects our mood and our well-being and so on. It has slightly antiseptic effect too, so again that immunomodulating effect, helping our immune system fight infection. It's really, really key. But most of all, I think rosemary is quite stimulating. If you think about it, you know, it's not something you necessarily want to be taking just before bed. You're much more likely to take a cup of it in the morning, set yourself up on the right foot for the day. It's a very pleasant, unlike chamomile, it's a very pleasant herb to take as a tea.
Maybe if you put them together, it might mask the taste.
And this is exactly, you're becoming the herbalist, Fiona, because that's exactly what we would say. Mix the herbs together. You know, why not have a little bit of lavender, chamomile and rosemary together, or lemon balm. And that's exactly what the book says as well. It talks about each of these herbs individually, but it also makes little suggestions about how you can mix them together and make something that's actually quite pleasant. It doesn't have to be horrible.
It doesn't have to be horrible. Well, that is good. And I've got to say, I would much prefer that than something that's in alcohol. You know, when you're dripping everything down your ether, it's, you know, getting the bits out of it and putting it into an alcohol tincture. And I kind of think, well, you probably killed it by putting it in the alcohol. And so what was the point?
Well, yeah, I think I also really like herbal teas, and I do prescribe a lot of herbal teas in my practice. But by using alcohol, funnily enough, it does have a very slightly liver improving effect. Minute doses of alcohol actually seem to improve liver function for most of us, not everyone, but it's obviously all a matter of dosage.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. All right, we are up to the last minute. So just the next question is really, if you're looking for a herbalist, what sort of qualifications should people be looking for? Because there's a lot of people out there who go off and do a weekend course, or who don't even bother doing anything and call themselves anything under the sun these days. So what should people be looking for?
Yeah, First of all, I think look for a medical herbalist. So medical herbalists have to have studied to degree level medical sciences, but they often will incorporate very traditional and very holistic techniques of application of looking at herbs and thinking of you as a whole person. A really good place to start would be to check out the National Institute of Medical Herbalists. Although they are a UK body that was formed in 1864, they do have a list of members across the world, and they are still regarded as one of the, well, as the preeminent body of practicing medical herbalists worldwide. So yeah, my first port of call would be to check out their website. You can become an affiliate member. There are all sorts of conferences and talks and workshops, and they have been for many years now working alongside the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, the MHRA here in the UK, so that the provision of herbal medicine guidance is actually good.
Brilliant. All right. Well, I shall leave it there because we're up to an hour and I don't want it to go over and then it'll tell me I'll lose it or I won't be able to do anything with it. So, as these things do, timing you out. Thank you again, everybody. This is Anita Ralph, and the reason why you can't see her if you're there on Instagram is because I don't have anything to hold my phone up, but there she is. Um, so, thank you again, and this should hopefully record, and well, it has recorded, and it should hopefully save, and people who didn't join us tonight should be able to watch it back, and hopefully it'll go onto the Instagram as well. So thank you so much, and where can people find you very, very quickly? You're at
So my clinic is called Medicine Tree. It's in West Malling in Kent, and you're most welcome to get in touch if you're trying to find a nice herbalist in your area. We'll always put you in touch with somebody near you. But thank you so much for your interest in herbal medicine, and thanks for those people that have come along tonight or are listening later. I'm so excited about plant medicine, and I feel like it's something that women should know about, that it is a wonderful complement to conventional medicine or used on its own. So
brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, take care, and I will end both of these now if I can work out how to do this simultaneously with both hands. Take care. Bye bye.
bye.